Right, you're listening to Pacific Mornings on 5:31 PI. I'm William Terite. Great to have your company this morning. Thank you for sticking with us. Well, there's plenty going on in the geopolitical arena at the moment. China's premier will, of course, be heading to New Zealand this week. It's the first time a premier has visited Aotearoa since 2017. It begs the question, what's behind the visit? Obviously, there's no secret of brewing tensions in the Pacific between China and the US. And French President Emmanuel Macron has called a snap election after a stinging European vote defeat by the far-right National Rally. So here to discuss this and much more, and to help us make sense of it, is international relations expert Geoffrey Miller. Thank you very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Good morning, William. Great to be here.
So firstly, what do you make of this visit by China's premier to New Zealand this week?
It's massive. China's Premier Li Qiang is coming here. It's the first visit by a Chinese premier since 2017, and he's very much Xi Jinping's right-hand man. He's a close confidant of the Chinese president, so it's a really important visit. It's the most senior visit, as I said, since it's the most senior visit only in since a couple of months because Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, came in March. And that just shows you just how interested China is in New Zealand at the moment. They very much want to have New Zealand's ear. And a lot of that is about AUKUS and trying to influence New Zealand ahead of any decisions that are taken on New Zealand joining Pillar 2 of that AUKUS arrangement.
And we were talking to political leaders from across the Pacific recently about AUKUS, a number of them concerned about it and what it means for them. What do you think in terms of the discussions between New Zealand and China this week? I mean, no doubt they will be talking about AUKUS to an extent, right?
Absolutely. Look, outwardly, Christopher Luxon, the New Zealand Prime Minister, has said that it's going to be about trade and business. And there's some reasons for that because the Chinese Premier tends to focus on the economy. And no doubt there will be some good positive stories about trade. Remember, China is New Zealand's biggest trading partner by far. But I think behind the scenes there will be some difficult conversations on what New Zealand is doing with AUKUS. New Zealand has signalled that it's open to exploring Pillar 2 of AUKUS. It's not there yet in terms of joining. That's partly because of the New Zealand side, but more because of the AUKUS side, and they haven't taken a final decision in Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom on inviting New Zealand to join. They have signalled they want Japan involved, and interestingly, Christopher Luxon will be heading to Japan next week. So, when it comes to the Pacific countries are pretty much lukewarm on AUKUS, lukewarm to negative overall. An exception perhaps is Fiji, which has signalled more positivity towards AUKUS. Certainly, Sitiveni Rabuka last week in his meeting with Christopher Luxon when he visited was more positive towards New Zealand becoming involved. But others, where you look at Samoa or Cook Islands, they have been quite lukewarm because this involves, nuclear technology coming into, the general Pacific area, not necessarily nuclear weapons. These are nuclear-powered submarines that Australia is getting as part of AUKUS Pillar 1, but it's still nuclear technology and arguably goes against the spirit, if not the letter, of the Treaty of Rarotonga.
And so we had Christopher Luxon on recently talking about AUKUS. Obviously, no decision made on whether New Zealand will join Pillar 2, of course. But again, what do you think in terms of the relationship? If New Zealand went ahead with this, could it fracture that relationship with the Pacific? Because, like I say, we've had very vocal Pacific leaders who are very much against it because of, as you highlighted, the nuclear concerns.
Yes, I think it could. I think New Zealand signing up to Pillar 2 would be quite a defining moment in all kinds of ways for New Zealand's foreign policy, for its relations with Pacific countries, for its relations with a whole host of countries, really. I think it would really see a fracturing of quite good relations overall with China. I think Pacific countries would be disappointed with New Zealand if it did go ahead and join Pillar 2. I think it would be a momentous decision for New Zealand to take and one that New Zealand should think very carefully about. New Zealand's independent foreign policy has been in the making for 40 years. It's been very successful overall. That had its birth back in the 1980s over the nuclear-free policy. This would be, if New Zealand did join AUKUS Pillar 2, New Zealand would be walking away largely from that independent foreign policy. So it's a big decision, and it hasn't been made yet. and that's why China's premier is coming here to try and influence Christopher Luxon one more time.
Look, it's a crystal ball gaze question, and feel free to defer it, but do you feel like New Zealand is going to go a particular way, or is it just too hard to tell?
It is really hard. I mean, you see signals all the time. Winston Peters went to Washington, D.C. back in April, and he signed up New Zealand to a joint statement which said, New Zealand saw there were powerful reasons to become involved in AUKUS Pillar 2. At the same time, Christopher Luxon is perhaps a bit more non-committal than that. Uh, I think some of these decisions will just depend on others' timelines. We've got a United States presidential election year at the moment, and if Trump wins the election, things could change quite substantially if no decisions are taken before then. And the more closer we get to that US election date in November, the harder it is, I think, to see big decisions being taken on things like AUKUS, because the United States will just become focused on domestic issues, and in the end, it's the United States that will have the final say on expanding the AUKUS membership when it comes to Pillar 2.
Mm. And how would you, I suppose, with AUKUS in mind, how would you characterize or describe the geopolitical tensions in the Pacific at the moment? Obviously, you've got two major players, the US and China, vying for that spot, right, or for influence.
Absolutely, and it's all really began or transitioned, I think, in 2022 when China signed a security pact with Solomon Islands. And since then, pretty much every country who has an interest in the Pacific region has been trying their best to show how good they are to the Pacific and what a good neighbor and good friend they are to the Pacific. So New Zealand's been part of that. You've had big trips, several trips now by New Zealand's Foreign Minister Winston Peters, by Shane Reti, the Pacific People's Minister, and by the Prime Minister Christopher Luxon to the Pacific. And other countries, Australia, the US, all kinds of other countries have been replicating that strategy, giving a lot of face time to countries that had previously felt neglected. And I think that's to the Pacific's benefit, to be perfectly frank. And there's been money projects started. I think that's a really good thing. And Pacific countries have been really clear overall that they want to see development, and they want to see a focus on climate change. So when it comes to AUKUS, I think for a lot of Pacific countries, they find that very much a distraction from the main issues that they are interested in, and they want outside players like Australia, like New Zealand, like the US to, really meet their own needs, rather than use them as a geopolitical pawn in this bigger game of geopolitical great power competition between the United States and China.
Yeah, and you mentioned a good point there. Just briefly, if we could touch on it, is the Pacific being treated as such in terms of how, in your words, a geopolitical pawn at this stage, or is there ways for the Pacific to leverage and benefit off this position that they're in as well?
I think it is both. I think they are being used as geopolitical pawns because the Pacific is a very strategic region. I mean, it was the case in World War II. It's the case today just because of geography. And, we're seeing these escalating tensions now between China and the West that's been going on for some years. And the Pacific is now just part of that strategic theatre. But there are opportunities, as you say, for the Pacific countries to leverage off that. They're getting a lot of face time now and a lot of attention. A lot of foreign leaders are suddenly coming to the Pacific on a regular basis. That's to their advantage, all power to Pacific countries, and may they make hay while the sun shines, in my view.
And just finally, if we go back to the China's Premier's visit to New Zealand, what are some of the other motives, do you think, behind this trip? We've heard in recent weeks of China keen to join CPTPP. Are there any other particular motives here that could be at play?
China, I think, values its relations with New Zealand in part to try and show an example to other Five Eyes countries like Australia, like the United Kingdom, like Canada, that are perhaps a bit more hawkish traditionally. So I think China typically likes to use New Zealand as an example when it comes to trade. New Zealand was the first Western country to sign a free trade agreement. there is some possibility that that free trade agreement will be upgraded to provide greater trade in services, which are still limited to some degree under that FTA, even though the FTA overall is very, very generous. And also visa access. There's about a dozen countries now that China has given visa-free access for short visits of up to a couple of weeks. It's quite a recent development. There are no English-speaking countries on that list except for Ireland. New Zealand could be the first Five Eyes country to join that club. So I think China's message overall to New Zealand with this trip is don't put it all at risk. There are a lot of good things that New Zealand gets out of the relationship with China, the world's second most populous country now, and $20 billion worth of exports go to China every year from New Zealand. So I think China will try and make this a very positive visit, while there may be some hard words put on Christopher Luxon behind the scenes when it comes to AUKUS. I think outwardly it will be showering praise on the New Zealand-China relationship, but the subtext will be, you don't want to lose that good relationship, which you could if you make the wrong decisions in China's view.
Certainly, and if we switch tack here, we put our focus into New Caledonia. Before we get into what's happened with French President Emmanuel Macron, if we cast our minds back to May 13, what's your opinion on how things have unfolded in New Caledonia with the civil unrest?
Look, it was quite a shock to those of us who perhaps didn't have New Caledonia first and foremost on our minds up till that point. While it's very close to New Zealand, it's probably one of the closest uh, Pacific places to New Zealand. It's not one that New Zealand perhaps has focused on a lot. Winston Peters, I think, understood the significance of New Caledonia, and he was due to visit the territory, I should say, that week. But then those riots broke out. But otherwise, it's not a somewhere that New Zealand ministers tend to visit very often, compared with, say, Fiji or Samoa, other Pacific countries that are close to New Zealand and Polynesia. So it was something of a surprise, and yet not a surprise, because if you look at the history of New Caledonia, there's been a lot of tensions really between the indigenous Kanaks and the French rulers, and that has been the case now for many years, and that's what led to ultimately a flawed referendum process, and some of the disquiet as a result of the way that the referendum process was conducted, particularly the final referendum that was held in 2021 during the COVID outbreak. So it's a complex picture overall, you have to say, and it's one that's not going to go away. While the immediate unrest might have been quelled thanks to a large influx of French military and police, I think it's sadly safe to say that this will keep coming back until a long-term political solution is found.
Certainly. And speaking of that, obviously, for those who are perhaps listening and still don't quite have an understanding of what's happening in New Caledonia, a lot of this civil unrest was caused by controversial law reforms over in France that aim to increase, voter base of French people moving over to New Caledonia. There was concern that it would dilute the indigenous vote over there, and so that's what caused this uprising, for lack of a better phrase. French President Emmanuel Macron, though, and here's the interesting thing, within the last day, has called a snap election after a stinging European vote defeat by the far-right National Rally. What do you make of, one, that snap election, and what implications or consequences could it have, if any, on New Caledonia?
Yes, the significance of the French legislative elections that have been called is that it will effectively put on hold the electoral reform in New Caledonia. That was going to go to a joint session of the French Parliament. Well, you're going to have elections now, so that won't happen in the near term. I mean, Emmanuel Macron had already signalled that he was going to put this on hold for a while there was some dialogue and negotiations undertaken, but it's going to go on hold for longer. I think that will allow everyone to take a breath and perhaps think about the way that things have developed over the past 6 weeks or so.
Mm.
I think in the longer term, though, it's probably not going to be great news for New Caledonia in terms of if the independence movement there, the Canucks, because uh, if the National Rally does very well, this is Marine Le Pen's far-right party in the legislative elections, I think she's going to harden France's grip on the territory, on New Caledonia. She tweeted back in 2017, New Caledonia is France. So I think that probably tells you most of what you need to know about what her general opinion of the situation will be. I think it will be a hardened military solution, and Macron's position himself. I mean, he's more of a centrist. Was that look, the referendums have been held. There was a vote to stay with France. It's been decided. Live with it. I think Marine Le Pen is going to just underline that and underscore that. And sadly, it's probably not what we need. I think we need more of a political solution. There has to be some kind of political solution to this problem. You can't, I think, win this on a military basis. And there's a lot of inequality between the Canucks and the French settlers who've come later to New Caledonia, particularly the more recent settlers. In the end, it's that inequality is probably the driving force behind some of this unrest. And
Mm.
until you resolve these underlying issues, referendums or not, you're not going to solve the problems in New Caledonia.
Certainly, and I just want to bring out the figures from in terms of that polling. So Macron's Renew Party polled less than 15%, while Marine Le Pen's secured more than 31%. Again, this is crystal ball gazing here, but do you think it is a genuine prospect that we could have a far right party, not only in control of France, but also tightening its grip on New Caledonia?
Look, there's a move in throughout Europe to the right. It remains to be seen just exactly what share of the vote that Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party receives in any legislative elections. Perhaps the snap election will work against uh, the National Rally. The fact that Emmanuel Macron has used timing, it was a surprise decision. But as I said, there's a tide towards the right in Europe. It wouldn't be a surprise if the National Rally does very well in those elections, and that will have some impact on New Caledonia down the line. It's probably not going to be the first order of business, though, for any new French government. New Caledonia, it's important. It got the headlines when those riots unfolded a few weeks ago. Emmanuel Macron flew there, but it's receded from the headlines somewhat. It is a long way away from mainland France. I don't think that will be Marine Le Pen's perhaps first priority, but no doubt it will be dealt with, and it will be dealt with, I think, probably in quite a strong militarily directed, security directed fashion, which will be unhelpful if that's what happens. If Le Pen's party, ends up in control. But even if it's in a coalition of some form, I think Le Pen's party is going to have some say, and there's going to be perhaps a more right-wing approach taken to New Caledonia.
Okay, interesting developments. That was international relations expert Geoffrey Miller. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. You have a good rest of your day.
Thanks very much, William. You too.
Cheers. Now, if you missed that interview, you can watch it in full on 531PI's